the COVID-19 crisis that is happening right now, what we are seeing is that there is this incredible impact that is happening to our food system from production to consumption. For those of you who are following the news, you're seeing that farm laborers are being, still they're out in the fields picking our vegetables or losing their jobs. People in restaurants and grocery stores are still working or losing their jobs and shuttering. We see this incredible impact that this has had on food insecurity and instability, as well as the emergency food system. And so this call today is going to have two parts. The first part, we're going to hear from 4 members of the network who are going to talk to us broadly about these issues of farm labor, the emergency food supply chain right now, also policy and farmers markets. That will be for the first half hour of this call. In the second half hour of the call, we're going to unmute all of you and bring you into the conversation as panelists, essentially, so that we can have an open dialogue. The goal of this call is to really share what we're seeing on the ground right now in relation to the food system, to be able to ask each other questions and answer questions for one another about best practices right now and what we're seeing as emerging, and also for an eye on the economic impacts that this is having on these different sort of buckets within our food system, and also with an eye on how we can actually use this moment to create a better food system, a more just food system, a more equitable food system going forward. So I just want to briefly introduce our panelists. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see them here. So we have 4 panelists here who will each talk for about 5 minutes. Okay, so Amelie Lipstrew is the Policy Director at Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. Amelie is going to be talking to us today about farmers and also federal and state policy. Michelle Moskowitz-Brown is the Executive Director of Local Matters and also the current chair of the Ohio Food Policy Network. She'll be talking to us about emergency food systems. Bryn Bird is a producer with Bird's Haven Farms in Licking County and a member of the Licking County Local Food Policy Council. And Bryn will be talking to us today about food labor and also just labor issues in general. And then Erin Molnar is the Director of Local Food Programs on Countryside, and she'll be talking to us about farmers markets and the economic impact on farmers markets. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amelie.
Thank you, Kara. Can you all hear me okay? Great. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you all. We have been communicating with many of our farmers since this pandemic has escalated. Many of you already realize that farming is a very risky, unpredictable business, and certainly the situation that we're now facing puts farmers in even greater uncertainty about their markets, about what they should grow, their inventory, and if they will have markets, as well as labor, which Bryn will be speaking to shortly. First, I just wanted to share some of the things that OFA has been doing to support farmers and to collaborate with others. We have put together a list of policy recommendations with economic impact projections of what this COVID-19 crisis could have on the food system, and makes recommendations for mostly state, but also some federal policy that can help ameliorate that situation. And Amanda is going to be putting a bunch of those links in the chat box so that you can have access to that information. We did put out an action alert late last week that was working to try and mobilize folks around some of the federal stimulus packages that are being developed. I think the third one was passed very late last night, really early this morning. And I did want to share that Um, in that package, there are many billions of dollars devoted to agriculture through the Commodity Credit Corporation, but that money is pretty general and sometimes goes to farmers that already have safety nets through subsidized crop insurance or Title I programs. But because of the advocacy of a lot of people out there, the bill also creates a new separate $9.5 billion pot of funding in the Secretary of Agriculture's office to provide aid to other growers, including specialty crop growers, dairy, livestock, as well as local food supply chains, including farmers markets, restaurants, and schools. So that's a really great first step in terms of some of the federal policy actions that are being taken. You may see another action alert late this week because we want to make sure right now there's no federal oversight to ensure that that money goes to those local food systems actors that it's supposed to go to. And we want to put pressure on Congress to make sure there's sufficient oversight of those funds. So please also take a look at those state and federal policy recommendations. We also put together a blog which disseminates the governor's stay-at-home order and what it means for agricultural businesses. So if you know people that are unsure, you can direct them to that blog post. Also included in that post is a letter that food and farm businesses can use when they're in transit to show that they are working for what's considered an essential infrastructure business. And so that can provide reassurance to people should there be enforcement activities that take place. We're working collaboratively with Produce Perks, the Ohio Farmers Market Managers Network, and others to determine how we can best have a really robust and unified response to these issues, and also to help amplify each other's voice when it comes to these state and federal policy recommendations. And I actually will cut it off right there and just say that a lot of those resources are posted in the chat box. Please stay tuned for opportunities to be proactive on these recommendations to ensure that our farmers, our local and regional food systems are supported during this crisis.
Thanks, Kara. Do you want me to jump in there?
Yes. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Amelie. I'm Michelle from Local Matters and chair of OFPN. I think what we're noticing, as all of you are noticing, is that the coronavirus has showed us all how we are deeply connected. I know we talk about being a network of networks. And certainly we're noticing that what our individual networks are, what our local, our state, our federal networks are, and it's also illuminating all the cracks in that network. So, some of the things that, we're thankful for, that we have a really robust emergency food system that can get a lot of food to a lot of people, but we also know it doesn't have the capability to support all of the additional people who are now in need, but also all of the people who are homebound. Kara mentioned farm workers traveling together. A lot of people who don't have money or a car will travel together to get their food. So there are a lot of issues that are happening that already existed for disabled, elderly, and new people who are in need of help, and individual delivery that's just not getting taken care of. Another crack on nutrition incentives is, of course, you probably know that the Produce Perks benefits are now available for match, an unlimited match of dollars. And of course, we're really grateful that farmers markets are considered essential and they'll be open, but we've got this really arcane system of tokens for 3 different programs and no technology to kind of link them all. And so that's an issue. The fact that people who have SNAP can't order food online has been an existing issue. Like those of us who can afford to can get our Click It list and go get food at the supermarket. But if you have SNAP, they don't accept that currency at the supermarket. And so you have no access to that benefit or that safety. So those are some of the cracks that we're noticing. Of course, I'm going to be talking a little, for a few minutes about emergency food, but just disclaimer, I do not work in the emergency food system in a normal day. I work in food education, access, and advocacy, really hands-on work. So we have certainly pivoted a lot in this last week and a half. But a lot of this work is stuff that I interact with in various ways. So for example, I spoke with Lutheran Social Services in Franklin County. They actually are the largest provider of Mid-Ohio food across 20 counties. And about a year ago, they moved online to their ordering. So for their customers, they're able to do that sort of click it list for all groceries and also household items. And they have unlimited supplies of fruits and vegetables. So if you're in Franklin County, the Lutheran Social Services Champion site is where the most food is coming out of in that community, in addition to the Grove City Mid-Ohio site. And all of that is on the Local Matters COVID tab if you're in Franklin County. But just to say as an example, as I'm sure in your communities, that pantry has experienced a 400% growth over the same period of a week, same time last year. So that's some of the struggle, but also the fact that if you're using the food banking system, or if you're qualify for SNAP, that you need to have a proof of your income. These are barriers that we're hoping we got lifted. In addition to, I had the fortune of being on a call with Senator Brown yesterday, and from his lips to your ears, he says that working requirements are stupid, and he's right. And I couldn't love him more for that. So we're trying to work on lifting those things. In addition, Local Matters has been working with Food Rescue US to connect restaurant food to people in need, and we're also launching a kitchen with Together and Company. As of today, we're serving 200 meals to the YWCA family shelter. So I'm grateful for the time to be creative. It's unfortunate, of course, that we're all suffering in many ways, but I'm enjoying the ability to be really flexible in those spaces. We're seeing a lot of needs between churches and residents, like I said, in neighborhoods that need more food. And I would just say to all of you, as the very volunteer chair of the OFPN, I would ask us all to consider how we're contributing in this movement, so that the sum is bigger than our parts, as Amelie had said. As I mentioned, I was on the call with Senator Brown with other folks across the state, and he said there will probably be a fourth bill coming. So we should be thinking about what we want in that fourth bill. It seems like they're open, and we want to picture that future state to take us into the opportunity, to build amongst this, very unfortunate breakdown. So we know our fates are tied together, and what are we going to do about it? I'm looking forward to hearing from you all in a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I'm wondering if, just for anyone on the call who doesn't know what a click it list is, what does that mean?
Oh, sure. I was just implying that, when you order from a Kroger, if you order from the grocery store, you can just plug in what you want. When you go, I would just add this little note about, they've added this technology, and the community was in an uproar until they saw how it worked. And so I just want everyone to keep in mind that, we might not like change, but oftentimes that, it takes us a minute, but then everybody realized the dignity of not having to wait an hour to get your food. When you drive up, the food is available to you. So that's what a click it list does. You order online, you drive through, you pick up, just like anybody who's paying with currency at a grocery store has the ability to do at, say, a Kroger. Obviously not yet at the farmers markets. And of course, I know we want to build community and not go all online, but I think we need a variety of technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Bryn.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for asking me to speak today a little bit on the farm labor issue. I think, this is a multifaceted conversation, and just changing at every moment too. I've spent the week kind of talking with Bruce Goldstein at Farm Worker Justice, Tirso Moreno at the Florida Farm Workers Association, and Millie Trevino out in California too, about some of the things that they're seeing on the ground, and then how that's relating back to some of these federal conversations that are happening right now. So America's farm worker labor is consisted of about 11 million people. 70% are migrant and immigrant labor force. In California alone, it's about 800,000 farm workers, migrant and immigrant farm workers are working right now. And most of them come through the H-2A guest worker program. which is a visa program that allows for farm labor to come for the season, and it's a legal status, and it's a visa program. At this point, they've halted any new H-2A visas from being processed. And so at the beginning, the conversation was a lot of, we need to make sure that we're still doing the interviews, doing placements, going through the vetting process, so that way there isn't a holdup once the, hopefully when we all get back to normal. But and so I know that we've talked about that, but also it's the conversation of where everyone is right now in the labor force. And there's just a lot of concern, as we've all said, agriculture is essential and is exempt from all of these standards, but the problem is they're also not really doing the best to ensure the safety of farm workers at this point. One of the bigger things, is maybe in the fields, it might look like they're being spatially distanced in a field, but not in the pack houses, not in the dairy barns. In dairy barns, you are working shoulder to shoulder, not in the meat processing facilities. And this morning, Smithfield in South Dakota did say they have 2 positive COVID cases, and that's just going to go through a community very fast that works so close together. It's also with their carpooling. Most farm labor, especially down south, they are bused into fields. They meet at central locations and they get onto buses that they then go into the fields together. To get from one community to another community, it's also usually done through very crowded buses or modes of transportation. The housing, it's legal in H-2A visas to have 15 people to a 3-bedroom home. So if you have 15 people to a 3-bedroom home, these are crowded conditions. And so there's this conversation of we, are starting to get into peak production, and we're bringing in a lot of labor force that needs to work. I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, these are people who, their spouses also might be working in the food industry, be laid off. They need to be working, but are we taking the dedicated precautionary measures that are needed? One of the, things too that's just going through is there's been nothing, very little has been put out in Spanish or in Portuguese or in foreign languages, in Hmong, in any other foreign language about the COVID. And so there's still a lot of concern that we're just also not from the federal government getting these conversations out there. We're also, just really concerned about just the racism and the fear that's going to go on around this too. In Beadle County, South Dakota, which has a incredibly large migrant and immigrant population because of the larger meat processing plants, and also in some of the larger like CAFO's farming operations. I mean, they were touted in 2016 as welcoming in like one of the largest, immigrant populations into a rural community. But then in this, they immediately said that they were the first county in South Dakota to have an outbreak. They had 7 in a day, and the community immediately started saying it had to have been the immigrant population, to where the health department finally came out and said, no, just so you know, it was 7 people who are white. And it was very hard and terrible that this health department had to like come out and say this conversation. So I think that as we're going through this, we continue to think about the labor. There's a lack of childcare for people who are now going into the fields. Their normal childcare is being taken away, and a lot of these like essential childcare workplaces that are being stood up are for healthcare workers. But there hasn't been any language in any of these daycares that are allowed to stand up that have to do around like essential work for childcare, for farm workers, for farm labor, and those other essential industries that really have no choice or no options at all of where their kids are going to go. So that's a huge problem. For local labor, in the local labor market, if for farms that might not be using H-2A visas or migrant or immigrant farm labor, in these past few years, it's been such a low unemployment rate. There has been a huge labor shortage, and now farms are definitely starting to get calls. We were just talking, a group of local producers in Central Ohio were saying, now we're getting inundated with people asking if they can come work on our fields. Do we have any work? Can people start back? People who reached out, who had been working for us, who left for other jobs. And And while we would love to be able to be that resource and to be somebody who people can come work for, there is just so much in limbo for local producers' own marketplaces. Growers that are growing for like farm labor are most often selling into the grocery store industry and into groceries and large distribution networks that are going to continue on. So even getting labor there is okay. Local farms and local labor are selling more into institutional buyers who are now not buying because all the institutions are gone, and into local restaurant buying. So now the local restaurants are not buying. So the local labor force, people who need jobs, need to work for farms that are selling into local places that are not buying. Then migrant workers who should not be probably working in these incredibly crowded groups are selling into these large grocery store resources. So there's a misalignment of where farm labor needs are and community is. And that's a huge problem that we've been talking about. And it is like, there's just as we're working through this, local producers don't know what our marketplace is going to be. So the idea of hiring anybody right now is very scary. Farm markets are saying they're not going to start, even though we're essential. There's going to be major disruptions in the food chain as we're moving forward. And a lot of this comes down to labor, of local labor is not being hired on by local farms because of the fear of where the marketplace is going to be. Immigrant and migrant labor should not be working in the conditions they're working in. And so a lot of them aren't being let into the country. They're not getting onto the farms they need to, and therefore they're not selling into the large distributors. So I hope that makes sense. I was trying today I was like, I need a way to show it. So I think as we're moving forward is continuing to amplify these issues and amplify the voice of our, our friends who are in the fields, who are the backbone of the food community and who are the backbone of our food chains and our food supplies. And that, as we're looking at it, even from a local area, local farms have lost a lot of their distribution. There is no institutional buying. There's no restaurant buying. I understand, and restaurants are probably not going to buy for a long time as they are trying to rebuild their businesses, and local food is more expensive. So I just want us to continue to amplify the UFW, the United Farm Workers. They are working really strong. And I would hope that we continue to look to them and to farm worker justice and what they're seeing on the field.
Thank you so much, Bryn. Mm-hmm. Erin.
Sorry, I'm just clicking over my camera. I'm clearly in full work at home mode right now. All right, I want to talk a little bit about what Countryside is doing for its markets and farmers and vendors in response to this and why. And then talk a little bit about more broader implications for farmers markets. So Countryside does operate a winter market. When we were faced with the decision as to whether we proceeded with that market or not, it was before Governor DeWine had made that designation. It was an indoor market. Our initial decision was to cancel that market. It was very early days and wait to see how the situation continued to develop. Even 4 days later, the situation had developed significantly, and we decided we needed to pursue other options. The first option was to continue to hold markets outside and implement additional protocols. The other option was to do something different. And so we explored doing a centralized pre-order online and centralized pickup for customers. That is ultimately what we ended up doing, and I'm going to put the link in the chat if you guys want to check out the online platform. We did that because we decided that it was the safest. It will be drive-through, so customers will stay in their car. We'll have scheduled drop-offs from vendors, so there'll be minimal contact at that period. It was also the only way that we could facilitate accepting SNAP. The SNAP transaction does not occur online, obviously, because you can't do that, but it does, we can do it on the back end and still provide access to those customers. It's obviously easier for customers to be able to shop for all of their products rather than individually contacting the various producers, even if there's going to be a central pickup point. So we thought it had the most financial viability as well as the most safety. It is certainly the most elaborate and expensive and time consuming as well. We were kind of specially primed for that unintentionally. We already have a mobile license that you would need to do this. We have a program where we buy and resell Ohio cheeses because those producers can't be at the market. So we already had that existing mobile license. We have an excellent relationship with Summit County Public Health. So we work closely with them to make sure that we were able to do this above board and fully licensed. I had an empty chest freezer in my garage, and we have a transit van that we could put it in. So there are probably very few markets out there who were that ironically well positioned in order to do this. So our ordering went live on Tuesday at noon. Ordering closes tonight at 6 p.m. So far, we've had over 300 orders, and sales are over $22,000. For a little bit of comparison, our winter markets are typically bi-weekly. The customer count is usually around 700, and average sales are usually at 13,000. So almost $10,000 more than we actually normally see on a winter market day. So I think the demand is definitely there. The producers are obviously really grateful, and many of them are seeing much higher sales than they do in person. So we've been very deep in getting this up and running, and I haven't engaged as much as I normally would have in various broader discussions. I've been kind of following along with the calls that OFA's been having and some that Produce First Midwest has been having. You know, I think my next steps are to figure out how to support other markets, because this is not going to be the way that they can go. They're going to need to make the decision whether or not they proceed with a market and how to do that. And given that many market managers are part-time, underpaid, under-resourced, or volunteer, that's going to be very challenging. So figuring out how to support them within the network, and then beyond that, looking at the broader, much broader and longer term implications for expectations for sales at farmers markets, and what is this going to do to SNAP enrollment and SNAP customers at markets. Yeah, so hopefully I will be able to engage more with that starting next week. But that's what we're doing. It seems to be going really well. We have our first pickup on Saturday, so we'll know more then.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, that's amazing. I'm glad that you guys had the infrastructure and were able to do that. Very inspiring. Thank you to all of the panelists and network members that just shared. So now we're going to turn it over to it being a larger open conversation. Amanda is going to unmute all of you at the same time. So we're going to ask that as soon as you get added into being a panelist, that you mute yourself so that we don't have a cacophony of noise coming through our webinar.
Kara, I'm working through it right now, and so it's allowing me to select allow to talk. So that should do the same thing as promoting to panelist. I know if you call in by phone, I think you're automatically muted and you have to hit *6 to unmute yourself. So if you're having challenges getting through because you've dialed in, try *6. So I have got through the majority of the list. So if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in.
And I also want to say that if you have questions that you want to write out in the chat box, please feel free to do that, and I can read them out loud to the panelists.
Kara, there was one question placed in the chat box already. I don't know if you missed that one.
Okay, let's start with the question in the chat box. This is from Michelle Newman. Looking at the online market, super cool, but how did you establish it? With over 40 vendors in our market, it boggles my mind of how we would manage the logistics. Did you allow vendors to only supply certain numbers of products? How did you get them all together for an order? Plus, did you have a pro web developer do this for you? A volunteer? What platform? How are you putting in the back end to pay vendors?
Those are all great questions, and I'm happy to answer them all now in brief. I'm also happy, probably starting next week or the week after, to have like individual calls with anybody to talk it through, or put together like a full presentation on the ins and outs. It is an existing platform. It's called Local Line. They're based out of Canada, but obviously, as you can see, serve the United States as well. I think they originally developed it for food hubs. I was, to be perfectly honest, incredibly shocked at how little hand-holding we had to do to get the vendors up and running in there. I figured that was going to be the hardest part. They were pretty self-sufficient. They loaded all of their products. The only restrictions we placed was that we limited to food this week. So, you know, folks who participated in the market that were selling soaps, their soaps aren't on there. And part of that was because I really wanted it to be accessible to SNAP, and I wasn't sure how to make that happen with additional products in there. I think I figured it out at this point in time, but what were the other questions? Oh, the fee structure. So one of my initial steps was to look at what this would cost, how that compared. The way I approached it was I looked at the 3 winter markets that we had to cancel, we would have to cancel, so 1 in March and 2 in April, and looked at what our fees would be, and then subtracted what our expenses would have been. So expenses would have been music, the police officers we have there, the cooking demo, stuff like that. That was my break-even point. So those incoming fees and those expenses, that was what we needed to meet to quote unquote pay for this now. It doesn't pay for it because we've had 3 full-time people working on it for 2 weeks. But it broke even for the time period. The fee structure is 6% of sales for vendors, which is what we charge at markets for vendor fees. And then there's a $3 customer order fee, which we waive for SNAP customers. My initial budgeting, I was much more reasonable in my projections. So my original sales projection for week 1 was $5,000. We quadrupled that. So now it looks like we're actually going to be making almost twice as much money from the combination of those fees that we would have from the markets, which doesn't mean that the market overall is going to make money. Anybody on the call who operates farmers markets or those who are familiar probably know that they're money losers. Did I answer all of those? I'm sorry. I think so.
Okay, so we have an anonymous question here in the question and answer box. Maybe Bryn, you could answer this question. What is the H-2A program? That's a great question.
The H-2A program, there's multiple guest worker visas. So when you, if you are looking to come into the United States from a different country to work, just like if we go to another country and you have to get work visas, there are various work visas. The H-2A is an agricultural visa that both for the producer or the farmer that they're going to go work on, there are standards, housing standards, transportation standards, food standards, work condition standards, as well as standards for the employee from coming into work. The biggest problem is there is not that many H-2A visas issued every year, and that was a big fight this year, and it was one of the policy wins that we had, was to get an additional 250,000 H-2A work visas into the United States. They are now all being held up, which is probably for the best and safe reason, but there are still, in the number, you can never, you never know the real number, but there's a larger percentage of farm workers who are working as undocumented and have no protections, have no work visas. So it's one of the legal ways to have a work visa.
Thank you. Okay, so here's a question for Michelle and all. I'm eager to see examples where restaurant workers, otherwise unemployed, are paid government or philanthropic money to prepare emergency meals for vulnerable audiences. Any examples in Ohio?
Okay, I'm going to throw that back to Amy in a sec for national examples because I haven't yet seen it in Ohio, but we work with Together and Company here in Columbus, and they had a lot of layoffs, obviously, and I reached out and spoke with Angela about how we could get product to her so that she can make meals. So we started that process literally today, and I think I mentioned in the comments that we're going to deliver 300 full meals, and what that looks like is, you know, I rescued chicken from Hot Chicken Takeover when it closed on Monday night, transported that to Angela, and then San Filippo. And thank you to the farmers. I know your food is worth a lot more than you're getting for it now, but they had a produce giveaway this morning, and so we got greens and spinach, and we're making bowls. The issue is going to be having enough money for food, but they're speaking with Mid-Ohio Food Bank tomorrow, and we'll start getting some more product so that all that gets supplemented, and we can keep costs down in terms of the free food that we're going to be delivering to essentially, you know, people who are experiencing homelessness, people in shelters, people in housing, you know, situations like seniors, where we can get food to a complex, and all that. So we're starting that up and hoping to ramp it up. Any national examples? I mean, we know about Jose Andres and his kitchen, but what else are people saying?
Thanks, Michelle. That was kind of a gimme question, but I asked it just to see if anybody else on in the group might have some examples. I've been reading great articles nationally where city emergency dollars, City of Cambridge, Massachusetts, is paying 15 restaurants in Cambridge to provide meals to the homeless. There's, you said, the World Central Kitchen model, a GoFundMe effort in LA for professional chefs and their certified kitchens to be cooking for restaurant frontline workers. But it does seem like a both and kind of opportunity to provide payment to an out of work restaurant crew who knows food safety and knows and has the equipment and the facility. And if there's, and it seems like something that can scale. So thank you for what you're doing with Together and Company in Columbus. And I signed up on the Food Rescue app. So hopefully it can help also ferry food locally.
Hey folks, this is Michaela. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So La Soup, which is a food rescue organization in Cincinnati, is doing something similar. They've worked out they already had a model where they were rescuing surplus food and preparing it into soups and casseroles that they then froze and redistributed out. And they've gotten a partnership set up with a really large pizza kitchen in one of the suburbs. I'm sorry, my child's having a meltdown about cheese in the background. They are doing, so they've got this partnership with these restaurants that they're able to now be taking a really huge quantity of food and keep their employees safely distanced. The restaurants are obviously shut down anyways. And then Gordon Food Service gave them a 18-foot frozen tractor trailer to freeze all the food in so that they could get that started out redistributing. And then I think they're working out a deal with Jeff Ruby restaurants to use some Jeff Ruby employees that he is going to be paying for them to continue to work. And they are definitely asking for local philanthropic dollars to help them financially make it work. So at some point, I think literally yesterday, they moved into the new facility that they're going to be using for the time being. So it's pretty crazy over there, but at some point we could ask them to do some sort of example or give a talk on how they're making it work for the network.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. Thank you for sharing that, Michaela. So there's another question here in the chat box from Carol. Now that institutional purchasing, such as at restaurants and schools, has dropped off, where is the demand higher? Where are foods coming from to meet increased demands at grocery stores? Will those sources continue to meet the shifted, increased demand?
I'll say, I mean, if anybody else wants to also do this, it's hard. I think there just are going to be disruptions. We might not see it, and especially in the grocery store, large food distribution. I actually think that what's going to happen is there'll be more imports, and Emily can chime in too if she wants to. I think there'll be more imports from other countries to fill those demands. It is harder to get local food into grocery stores. One is the price point and being able to and being able for local farms to meet the lower prices that grocery stores are purchasing at. There could be some potentials, but I actually think that the larger distributors will just start to import at some point, sadly.
And I would just add that for folks that are selling into kind of local and regional wholesale markets where their markets are disrupted, it's really difficult for them to turn on a dime and to identify a new market outlet. That's why, we have 2 specific policy recommendations in the document I referenced, one of which would purchase some of that excess produce from our local and regional farmers for redistribution or distribution into the emergency food system so that it's meeting both the needs of farmers to earn a living, as well as getting that food to people who need it the most, as well as ensuring that we have emergency disaster payments that are targeted to small, mid-sized, beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers.
Okay, we have another question here from Mike Hogan. ECI just got some additional funding from the county commissioners. Does anyone know if those funds are being used for that purpose? ECDI. And for Mike, I wonder if you could unmute yourself, if that's possible, and just for the purpose of.
I was just curious as to if anybody knew how they were using that additional funding, if they were trying to connect emergency food supply with some of the food clients that they work with.
I haven't heard anything, so we'll look offline if no one else knows.
So that's all the questions that are in the chat box, and I encourage people, if you have either questions for panelists or things that you are seeing or doing or hearing on the ground here in response to COVID-19 and seeing the effects on our food system, please unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
I did.
Any last thoughts or questions?
So Kara, this is Emily. I just wanted to reiterate that, as difficult as this crisis is for all of us right now, and with so much unknown, it still is a really opportune, teachable moment about the value of short supply chains and local and regional food systems. And so, I encourage all of us to take every opportunity to speak with the people who represent us and talk about the importance of that for our communities. And if you're interested or if you want more resources, I know that I sent out an analysis that was done nationally on what the economic impact would be of this pandemic to local and regional food systems. And that's something that might be helpful, but please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or want resources to have those discussions.
And I would just say, this conversation just really, again, shows that, agriculture and issues in rural America aren't just for one sector, but looking even just at the healthcare sector, recently the courts held up that, green cards can be held up and work visas can be revoked and stuff if immigrants are seen as using public dollars. And one of that was the use of the ACA and the healthcare exchange. There was the tax incentives, and there were some of those programs that were seen as actually incentive programs for the government, even though they were like mandated by the government. When immigrant and migrant workers went on the health exchange, that was and they got money back. It was seen as a way that they were using the government. So now there's a fear of going onto those healthcare exchanges during this crisis. And so I just wanted to say, like, as in all of our work, there's just such like a crossover and a way for us to continue to work together and amplify the voice in all of the ways that we're doing the work, not just in like looking at the local food sector, but as we're talking in healthcare in our communities and in every way that we talk.
Yeah, I would echo Bryn's comments and Amelie's and all the panelists saying that, you know, this group right here, we're the OFPN, we are OFPN. And so there are over 50 of us on this call today, but these webinars take place every month. So let's keep staying connected in that way. But even more than that, we need to create a shared agenda that we're talking to politicians about, elected officials about on the regular, as one unified voice that represents so many different interests. So if anything, you know, having this opportunity over the next few months to continue to solidify our policy statements. This is work that the steering committee, again, all volunteer, which many of you will see opportunities to, you know, get involved in that way, and hope that you will. But we'll be presenting some policy statements and then some shared agenda items for all of you to comment on. So stay involved on the OFPN list, serve, and know that, you know, it's true, we're not really necessarily ready to do that. You know, we still have a lot of structure to build, but we're very close to speaking together. We know what our shared vision is, back to Amelie and values. And so let's do it. Let's just keep this going and support all the people who are volunteering their time to keep us connected. And thank you so much.
And just one more thing to build on what Michelle just said. Michaela Oldfield, Amy Baskus, and myself are on a policy group for the network. And one of the things that we'll be doing in the very near term is compiling recommendations from different food, farm, and advocacy groups around this COVID crisis on the OFPN website, as well as providing some resources and information that you can all use so that we can kind of speak with one voice as a network. So thank you, Michelle.
This is Mike Hogan. I would add, separate from policy perspectives, if you guys work with any producers, encourage them to make sure they connect electronically with their local extension office. We've been putting together several different Zooms specifically on direct marketing, a lot of the topics we just talked about. We have one on Monday on how to develop a drive-through farmers market, or figuring out whether or not you can adapt yours. We had one last night for fruit and vegetable growers on some direct marketing topics. We're going to be doing one on food safety, I think next week. So encourage them to connect electronically. We're trying to get that posted on the front page of most county OSU extension websites. So if you start to get those production questions and adaptation questions, I know some of us are working with a couple of farmers markets on how they might change things. So encourage to drive those type of production and management questions, less so policy, obviously, to their local extension staff.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone else have any questions or comments or reflections before we close?
Kara, this is Amanda. Just the last chat in the chat box, I think from S. Smoller, they tried to unmute themselves. I'm not sure if they had some challenges, but they did share something there. So just wanted to highlight that real quick.
Yeah, I have no problem unmuting. I just thought this is so everybody can see it. And Mike Hogan, just referenced this after I posted my little comment there. So 331 is on 331, CFAES is conducting a webinar on drive-through farmers markets. That is all I had to contribute. But thank you so much. Very insightful, great commentaries.
Thank you. So Amanda is going to put together all of the links and the comments in the chat box and send them around to everybody. If you didn't get a chance to read through those on the call today, you will receive them via email later on. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Amelie, Michelle, Bryn, and Erin for being here and sharing all of this amazing work that's happening. I hope that it inspires you all, because I could not agree more with what Michelle said, that this is just exposing cracks we've all known that have existed in our food system all along, making them bigger, but also giving us the opportunity to fill them in new, exciting, and creative ways. So I'm glad that we're all in collaboration and in community here with one another. And I look forward to what this is going to allow us to create together. So so thank you very much for all the panelists. And that's it. That's it for our webinar for today. I hope you all stay really healthy and well and grounded in these changing times, and we'll see each other next month. Thank you.